The train station in Silver Creek, Montana, was little more than a wooden platform and a rickety bench under a sagging roof. Catherine Miller sat on that bench, her carpetbag clutched in her lap, watching the dust devils dance across the empty street. 3 days. She had been waiting for 3 days. Her intended husband, Harold Pritchard, had sent her a ticket all the way from Boston. His letters had been brief, but kind enough. He needed a wife. She needed a home. It seemed a fair arrangement. But when she'd stepped off that train on Monday morning, no one had been there to meet her. The station master, an elderly man named Mr. Howell, had been sympathetic at first. "Sometimes folks get delayed, miss. Ranch business, you know. He'll be along." But by the second day, even Mr. Howell's optimism had faded. By the third day, he avoided looking at her altogether. Catherine was 23 years old, plain-faced and too practical to cry. Her mother had died 2 years ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and a stepfather who'd made it clear she was a burden. Coming west had been her only option, and now this. She smoothed her dark blue traveling dress, the nicest thing she owned, and tried not to think about the $7 left in her reticule. $7 between her and complete destitution in a town where she knew no one. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Catherine's throat was dry, her head ached, and her stomach had stopped growling hours ago. She'd eaten the last of her bread that morning. Pride had kept her from begging, but pride wouldn't fill her belly. "Excuse me, miss?" The voice was small, uncertain. Catherine looked down to find a boy of perhaps 5 years, staring up at her with enormous brown eyes. He was dusty from head to toe, his dark hair sticking up in every direction, and there was a smudge of what looked like jam on his cheek. "Yes?" Catherine managed to smile despite everything. The boy tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that was almost comical. "Are you waiting for somebody?" "I was," Catherine said softly, "but I don't think they're coming." "Oh!" The boy's face fell. Then he brightened. "Do you got a mama?" The question caught Catherine off guard. "No, my mother passed away." "Me neither. My mama died when I was born." He said it matter-of-factly, as children do, but Catherine's heart clenched. "Papa says she's with the angels now." "I'm sure she is," Catherine said gently. The boy scuffed his boot in the dirt, then looked up at her again with those earnest eyes. "Do you want to be my mom?" Catherine blinked. Of all the things she'd expected today, this was not among them. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Thomas. But Papa calls me Tommy, and Cookie calls me that ornery varmint when I steal biscuits." He grinned, showing a gap where his front tooth should be. Despite everything, Catherine laughed. It felt strange after 3 days of silent despair. "Well, Tommy, I'm Catherine, and while I'm very honored you'd ask, I don't think your papa would appreciate me just deciding to be your mother. But you need somebody, and I need somebody," Tommy said with the irrefutable logic of childhood. "Papa, too. He's real lonely. He doesn't think I know, but I hear him sometimes at night, walking around when he can't sleep." Catherine's heart ached for this motherless child and his grieving father. "Where is your papa now?" "Getting supplies, but he takes forever, 'cause he talks to everybody about boring ranch stuff." Tommy sighed dramatically. "That's why I came to see the train, except there ain't no train right now." "Isn't any train," Catherine corrected automatically, then smiled. "Sorry, I used to be a teacher." Tommy's eyes went wide. "You can read and everything?" "Yes, and write, and do arithmetic. Papa says I gotta learn all that stuff, but there isn't a school here, just old Mr. Peterson, and he smells like tobacco and yells a lot." Catherine was about to respond when a voice boomed across the platform. "Thomas James Hawthorne! What did I tell you about wandering off?" Catherine looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. The man striding toward them was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his chambray shirt. His hair was dark, nearly black, and curled slightly at his collar. But it was his face that arrested her, all strong lines and sharp angles, with eyes the color of a storm cloud. He looked angry, worried, and exhausted all at once. He also looked like he could snap her in half without effort. "I'm sorry, Papa." Tommy ran to his father, who immediately softened, scooping the boy up despite his size. "But look, I found us a mama." The man's eyes shot to Catherine, and she felt herself flush from her collar to her hairline. "Tommy," the man said, his voice dropping to a rumble that Catherine felt in her chest. "You can't just—" "What have you been telling this poor woman?" "Just that we need a mama, and she needs a family, and she can teach me reading, and she talks real pretty, and—" Tommy. The single word was firm, but not unkind. The man set his son down and removed his hat, revealing more of that dark, unruly hair. "I apologize, miss. My son has an imagination." Catherine stood, drawing herself up to her full height of 5 feet and 3 inches. She still barely reached the man's shoulder. "No apology necessary, Mr. Hawthorne. Your son has been the only kind soul I've encountered in 3 days." Something shifted in those grey eyes. 3 days. And suddenly, it all came pouring out. The whole humiliating story. The letters from Harold Pritchard, the long journey west, the hope that had sustained her through every mile, and then the waiting, the growing certainty that she'd been abandoned, that she'd crossed half a continent to be left at a train station like unwanted luggage. When she finished, there was a long silence. Mr. Hawthorne's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "That son of a—" He caught himself, glancing at Tommy. "That ain't right. That ain't right at all." "Nevertheless, it's the situation I find myself in," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have $7 and no prospects. I'll have to—" She didn't know how to finish that sentence. Mr. Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment, his hat turning slowly in his large, work-roughened hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "Miss Miller, I'm going to make you a proposition, and I want you to understand it's a respectable one." Catherine waited, her heart hammering. "My ranch is 3 hours from here. It's good land, profitable, but it's isolated. Tommy needs schooling, and I need—" He paused, choosing his words. "I need help. The house needs a woman's touch. My boy needs guidance I can't give him, and I could use someone who can read and write better than I can, help with the ledgers and correspondence." "You're offering me employment," Catherine said slowly. "Yes, ma'am. Room, board, and fair wages. Separate quarters. Perfectly proper. I'll even throw in passage back east if you decide Montana ain't for you after a few months." He met her eyes steadily. "It ain't charity. I genuinely need the help, and you seem like a decent woman who's had a run of bad luck." Catherine's mind raced. It wasn't what she'd come west for, but it was infinitely better than starving on this platform, or worse, options she didn't want to contemplate. "Can I really be your teacher?" Tommy piped up, tugging on her skirt. Catherine looked down at that hopeful little face, then up at Mr. Hawthorne's carefully neutral expression. The man was trying to save her dignity, offering her work instead of charity. It was more kindness than anyone had shown her in longer than she could remember. "I accept," she said, "and thank you, Mr. Hawthorne, truly." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. "James. You can call me James, and I should warn you, ma'am, the ranch ain't fancy. It's rough country out there." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Catherine said, lifting her chin. James Hawthorne's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "No, ma'am, I don't suppose you are." The ride to the Hawthorne ranch was an education in discomfort. The wagon seat was hard, the sun relentless, and the road little more than a rutted track through endless grassland. But Tommy kept up a steady stream of chatter from where he sat between Catherine and his father, and she found herself smiling despite her aching back. "That's where I saw the bear," Tommy announced, pointing at a distant tree line. "Big as a house, big as a dog," James corrected mildly. "And it was running away from you, not at you." "Still was a bear," Tommy insisted. He looked up at Catherine with those earnest eyes. "Papa shot a mountain lion once, saved all the horses." "Did he now?" Catherine glanced at James, who kept his eyes on the road. "Was threatening the stock," he said simply. "Did what needed doing." There was something in his voice, a weariness that spoke of too many hard decisions made alone. Catherine found herself studying his profile when she thought he wasn't looking. The strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the fan of lines at the corner of his eye from squinting into the sun. He was handsome, in a rough, untamed way that Catherine had never encountered in Boston. The men she'd known there had been soft, civilized, comfortable. James Hawthorne looked like he'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains rising in the distance. As if feeling her gaze, he glanced over. Their eyes met for just a moment before Catherine quickly looked away, heat flooding her cheeks. "We're almost there," James said, "just over this rise." And the Hawthorne ranch spread out before them, in a valley carved by a winding creek. The house was larger than Catherine had expected, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch. Outbuildings dotted the property, Corrals held horses, and cattle grazed in the distance. "It's beautiful," Catherine breathed. "It's home," James said, and there was pride in his voice. "Built most of it myself. The original cabin is now the bunkhouse for the hands during roundup season." As they pulled up to the house, Catherine noticed curtains in the windows, flower boxes that had gone wild, and a rocking chair on the porch that looked like it hadn't been sat in for years. There were signs everywhere of a woman's presence, long absent. James seemed to see her noticing. "My wife Sarah, she tried to make it pretty. I've kept things up best I can," but he trailed off, setting the brake with more force than necessary. "Papa? Can Miss Catherine see my room?" Tommy was already scrambling down from the wagon. "Let's let Miss Miller get settled first," James said, climbing down and then turning to offer Catherine his hand. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused, warm, and so large it completely engulfed hers. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, and from the way his fingers tightened briefly, she wondered if he'd felt it too. He helped her down with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size, releasing her hand the moment her feet touched the ground. The inside of the house was clean but sparse. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a worn sofa, and a heavy wooden table with mismatched chairs. The kitchen was well equipped, but had the look of a place where cooking was purely functional, not enjoyed. "Your room is upstairs," James said, carrying her carpet bag. "There's 3 bedrooms. Mine's at the far end, Tommy's in the middle, and this one here was—" He paused in the doorway of a sun-filled room with faded yellow curtains. "This was meant to be a nursery, but we never—" "Well, it's yours now." Catherine stepped inside. The room was small but charming, with a window overlooking the front yard and mountains beyond. A simple bed with a faded quilt, a dresser, and a washstand made up the furnishings. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." James nodded, setting her bag down. "I'll let you freshen up. Come down when you're ready, and we'll discuss your duties and such." He paused at the door. "And Miss Miller, I meant what I said. This is a respectable arrangement. You have my word as a gentleman that you'll be safe here." "I believe you," Catherine said, and realized she meant it. After he left, she sank onto the bed and let out a long breath. 3 days ago, she'd been abandoned at a train station. Now she was in a house in the Montana wilderness with a man she'd just met and his precocious son. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in 2 years, she felt something that might have been hope. The first week at the Hawthorne Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Catherine rose with the sun, helped prepare breakfast, taught Tommy his letters in the morning, tackled the household accounts in the afternoon, and fell into bed exhausted each night. The work was harder than anything she'd done in Boston. Her hands, once soft and pale, began to roughen from washing clothes in lye soap and kneading bread dough. Her back ached from scrubbing floors, but there was a satisfaction in it too, in seeing the house transform under her care, in watching Tommy's face light up when he successfully wrote his name, in the way James's shoulders seemed to relax when he walked through the door each evening to find a hot meal waiting. James was gone most of each day, working the ranch with a quiet intensity that seemed to define everything he did. Catherine would watch him sometimes from the kitchen window, see him working with the horses or mending fence, his shirt clinging to his broad back with sweat. Once, she saw him pull off his shirt entirely in the afternoon heat, and the sight of all that bare skin, those muscles shifting under sun-bronzed flesh, had made her drop the plate she was washing. Tommy had laughed at her clumsiness. Catherine had blamed it on slippery hands, but James was always back for supper, always asked Tommy about his lessons in that deep, quiet voice, and always thanked Catherine for the meal with a courteous nod. He was unfailingly polite. He never raised his voice. He kept a careful distance, never touching her except when necessary, never letting his eyes linger, except he did let them linger when he thought she wasn't looking. Catherine would feel the weight of his gaze like a physical touch, would glance up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then he'd look away quickly, a muscle jumping in his jaw, and excuse himself to check on the stock or review the ledgers. It was driving Catherine slowly mad. She'd catch herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what his hands would feel like on her skin. Really on her skin, not just the brief, careful touches when he helped her down from the wagon or reached past her for something at the table, wondering what he'd look like first thing in the morning, sleep rumpled and unguarded, wondering if he thought about her the way she thought about him. The wondering kept her awake at night, lying in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Sometimes she'd hear James's footsteps in the hallway, slow and measured, and wonder if he was pacing, if he couldn't sleep either, if he was thinking about her on the other side of the wall. One evening, about 10 days after her arrival, Catherine was finishing up the supper dishes when she heard raised voices outside. Well, one raised voice, Tommy's, and James's low rumble in response. She dried her hands and stepped onto the porch to find Tommy in tears, James kneeling in front of him with his hands on the boy's shoulders. "I miss her," Tommy was saying. "I know I'm not supposed to, but I do. I miss Mama." Catherine's heart clenched. She started to retreat, give them privacy, but James looked up and their eyes met. Something in his expression kept her rooted to the spot. "It's okay to miss her, son," James said gently. "I miss her too sometimes. Your mama was a good woman." "But I can't remember her face anymore," Tommy sobbed. "I try, but I can't see it. What if I forget her completely?" James pulled the boy against his chest, his large hand cradling Tommy's head. "You won't forget her. We've got her picture in the parlor, and I'll tell you stories about her, help you remember. But Tommy," he pulled back to look at his son's tear-stained face, "your mama would want you to be happy. Would want us both to be happy. And she'd want you to love Miss Catherine too. Loving someone new doesn't mean you forget the people who came before." Tommy sniffled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Miss Catherine's nice." "She is," James agreed, his voice rough. Do you think Mama would like her?" James glanced at Catherine again, and the look in his eyes made her knees weak. "Yes, son, I think she would." Tommy seemed satisfied with that answer. He gave his father one more squeeze, then ran off to chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. James stood slowly, turning to face Catherine fully. They stood there on the porch, the space between them feeling charged, heavy with things unsaid. "I'm sorry you had to see that," James said finally. "Don't be. He's a child. He's allowed to grieve. It's been 5 years. Sometimes I think he should be past it by now. Grief doesn't work on a schedule," Catherine said softly. "I still miss my mother, and it's been 2 years. James nodded, leaning against the porch railing. "Sarah died bringing him into the world. Complications. The midwife did everything she could, but he swallowed hard. I was angry for a long time. Angry at God, at fate, at Sarah for leaving me. Even angry at Tommy sometimes, which made me feel like the worst kind of man." "You're not," Catherine said firmly. "You're human. And you've raised that boy alone, kept this ranch running, kept going when it would have been easier to give up. That makes you strong, not weak." James looked at her, really looked at her, and Catherine felt naked under that gaze. "You see the best in people, don't you? Even when they don't deserve it." "I see what's there," Catherine said. "And what I see in you is a good man, James Hawthorne, a good father, a good person." He moved then, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. Catherine's breath caught as he stopped just inches away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the scent of hay and leather, and something uniquely him. "Catherine," he said, his voice low and rough, "I need to know something. Are you happy here?" "Yes," she whispered, "because if you're not, if you want to leave, want to go back east or try somewhere else, I'll understand. Won't hold you to anything." Catherine's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I don't want to leave." "Why not?" The question was barely audible. "It's hard here, isolated. You could have an easier life somewhere else." "Because," Catherine said, surprising herself with her boldness, "this is the first place I've ever felt like I belonged. The first place that's felt like home. And you," she took a shaky breath, "you and Tommy are the reason why." James's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking over her cheekbone with a tenderness that made tears spring to her eyes. "You're making it real hard to keep my distance." "Then don't," Catherine breathed. For a long moment, they stood frozen. Then James leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Catherine rose on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was soft, sweet, nothing like the passion that would come later. It was a promise, a question, an answer all at once. James's lips were warm and gentle against hers, and when he pulled back, Catherine felt bereft. "I shouldn't have done that," James said, though he didn't sound sorry. "Why not?" "Because now I want to do it again, and I don't think I'll be able to stop." Catherine smiled, feeling bold and desired and alive. "Who says you have to stop?" James groaned, resting his forehead against hers. "You're dangerous, Catherine Miller." Good, she whispered. They stood there as the stars came out, not kissing again, but not pulling apart either, both of them knowing that something fundamental had shifted between them, that there was no going back to careful distance and polite formality. Inside the house, Tommy had already forgotten his tears and was playing with his wooden soldiers. Outside, two lonely people had found each other, and neither of them was willing to let go. She'd never been the sort of woman who inspired passion. She'd always been the sensible one, the practical one, the one men married for convenience rather than desire. She'd made peace with that long ago. But the way James looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, made her feel things she'd never felt before, made her aware of her body in ways that were entirely improper. The days fell into a rhythm after that first kiss. Nothing changed, and yet everything changed. James still maintained respectful distance during the day, but now there were stolen moments. A brush of hands when he passed her the salt at dinner, his fingers lingering on hers when he helped her down from the wagon after Sunday services, the way he'd stand just a little too close when they were reviewing the ranch accounts together, his breath warm on her neck as he pointed out entries in the ledger, and the looks. Oh, the looks. James would watch her with such naked want sometimes that Catherine felt it like a caress. She'd catch him staring at her mouth, her throat, the curve of her waist, and she was just as guilty, her eyes following him as he worked, admiring the play of muscles under his shirt, the confident way he moved, the gentleness of his hands despite their size and strength. Tommy seemed oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults, chattering away during meals about the birds he'd seen, or the horses in the pasture, or the stories Catherine had read him. But sometimes Catherine would catch the boy watching them with a knowing little smile that seemed far too wise for a 5-year-old. 2 weeks after their first kiss, Catherine was in the kitchen putting up preserves when she heard a crash from outside, followed by Tommy's scream. She ran, her heart in her throat, to find Tommy on the ground near the barn, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. James was already there, his face white, gathering the boy carefully into his arms. "What happened?" Catherine asked, running to them. "Fell from the hayloft," James said tersely. "Tommy, I need you to be brave, son." "It hurts, Papa." Tommy was crying, his small face scrunched up in pain. I know. James looked at Catherine. "We need to get him to Doc Patterson in town. Can you get blankets? We'll make a bed in the wagon." Catherine flew into action, her nursing instincts from caring for her mother kicking in. Within minutes, they had Tommy as comfortable as possible in the wagon bed, Catherine sitting beside him to keep him steady, while James drove at a pace that was fast but careful. The trip to town took nearly 2 hours. Tommy cried at first, then went quiet in a way that scared Catherine more than the screaming. She kept talking to him, telling him stories, singing songs, anything to keep him conscious and calm. James didn't say a word, but Catherine could see the tension in every line of his body, the white-knuckle grip on the reins, the muscle jumping in his jaw. Doc Patterson confirmed what they'd feared. A broken leg, clean break but painful. He set it with practiced efficiency while James held Tommy down and Catherine held his hand, both of them murmuring reassurances while the boy screamed. When it was done, Tommy was pale and exhausted, dosed with laudanum for the pain. Doc Patterson handed James a bottle of the medicine and strict instructions for care. "He'll need to stay off it for at least 6 weeks. The doctor said. "Keep him quiet, keep the leg elevated. It should heal fine, but he's going to need a lot of attention." James just nodded, his face drawn. They took a room at the small hotel in town, rather than risk the journey home in the dark. James carried Tommy upstairs, while Catherine followed with their hastily packed bag. The room had 1 bed. "I'll sleep in the chair," James said immediately. "Don't be ridiculous. The bed is big enough for all of us." Catherine was already pulling off Tommy's boots gently, careful not to jostle his splintered leg. "He needs us both close anyway." They settled Tommy between them, the boy already half asleep from the laudanum. Catherine lay on her side, watching his peaceful face, relieved that the worst was over. "I should have been watching him better," James said quietly from the other side of Tommy. "You can't watch him every second. Accidents happen. He could have died, but he didn't." Catherine reached across Tommy to touch James's hand. "He's going to be fine. Doc Patterson said so." James's fingers closed around hers, gripping tight. "When I heard him scream, when I saw him lying there. Catherine, I've never been so scared in my life. Not even when Sarah... He swallowed hard. I can't lose him. He's all I have. He's not all you have, Catherine said softly. You have me too. James's eyes met hers over their sleeping son. Do I? Yes, Catherine said simply. For as long as you want me. Forever then, James whispered. I want you forever. They couldn't talk more, not with Tommy between them, but they held hands across his small body, fingers intertwined, until they both finally fell asleep. The next morning, they made the slow journey home. Tommy was cranky and in pain, even with the laudanum, and Catherine spent the trip keeping him entertained with stories, while James navigated the rough road as carefully as possible. The following weeks were challenging. Tommy couldn't run, couldn't play, could barely move without help. He grew frustrated and tearful, and Catherine spent hours reading to him, teaching him card games, anything to keep his active mind occupied. James carried him everywhere, patient and gentle despite the ranch work piling up. Catherine took over more of the outdoor chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, even helping with some of the lighter ranch work when the hands needed an extra pair of hands for simple tasks. She was exhausted by the end of each day, falling into bed with aching muscles and calloused hands. But she was also happier than she'd ever been, because this was what family felt like. Taking care of each other, working together, being there when times were hard. One evening, 3 weeks after the accident, Catherine was tucking Tommy into bed when he grabbed her hand. Miss Catherine? Yes, sweetheart? Are you going to stay forever? Catherine's heart clenched. Do you want me to? Papa's happy when you're here. And I'm happy too, and he lowered his voice conspiratorially. Papa talks about you at night when he thinks I'm asleep. Does he now? Catherine tried to keep her voice neutral. He tells the stars how pretty you are, and how much he likes your laugh, and how he doesn't want you to ever leave. Tommy yawned. So you can't leave, okay? Promise. I promise, Catherine whispered, kissing his forehead. When she came downstairs, James was on the porch, exactly as Tommy had described, looking up at the stars. Catherine stepped out quietly, and he turned at the sound. He settled, finally. That leg is healing well, but it itches terribly. He's been a trooper. James patted the space beside him on the porch steps. Sit with me. Catherine sat, acutely aware of the warmth of his body next to hers. They were silent for a long moment, listening to the crickets and the distant call of an owl. Tommy told me something interesting, Catherine said finally. Oh, Lord, what did that boy say now? He said you talked to the stars about me. James went very still. Did he? He did. Catherine turned to look at him. Is it true? James met her eyes, and there was no hiding the emotion there. Yeah, it's true. Been talking to the stars since Sarah died. Helps me think. And lately, all I think about is you. James, let me finish, he said roughly. I know this is fast. No, we've only known each other a few weeks. But Catherine, I can't imagine this place without you anymore. Can't imagine my life without you in it. You've made us a family again. Made this house a home. Made me feel alive for the first time in 5 years. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. You've done the same for me. Given me a place to belong, people to love, a purpose. I was so lost before, and now you're found, James finished. We both are. He stood, pulling her up with him, and this time when he kissed her there was nothing tentative about it. It was claiming, possessive, full of all the weeks of restrained desire. Catherine melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Catherine, not as an employee, not as a convenience. Marry me because I'm falling in love with you, because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night, because I want you to be Tommy's mother in truth, not just in his heart. Catherine pulled back just enough to see his face. Are you sure? James, we haven't... I mean, you barely know me. I know enough. I know you're kind and strong and patient. I know you love my son like he's your own. I know you make me laugh and make me think and make me want things I thought I'd never want again. He cupped her face in his hands. I know that loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. I love you too, Catherine whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible, but I can't help it. I love you, James. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then marry me, please. Make it official. Be my wife. Yes, Catherine said, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. You're doing it again, Tommy announced one morning, a few days after James's proposal, looking up from his slate. "Doing what?" Catherine asked, trying to focus on the letters he'd been practicing. The boy's leg was healing nicely. The splint would come off in another week, and he was getting restless. "Staring at Papa with your mouth all soft." Catherine's face flamed. "Thomas Hawthorne, I most certainly was not." "It's okay," Tommy said with the casual cruelty of children. "Papa stares at you too. Last night at supper, he was looking at your hair all funny. And Cookie had to ask him 3 times if he wanted more stew." "Cookie was here?" Catherine seized on the distraction. She'd met the grizzled old cook a few times now, a man who'd been with James since the beginning and had opinions about everything. He comes up from the bunkhouse for big meals. Papa sent him away because he said we're doing fine with you cooking. Tommy grinned. Cookie was mad, but he also said Papa's been less grumpy since you came, so maybe you can stay. Before Catherine could formulate a response to that, the door burst open, but it wasn't James. It was Hank, one of the ranch hands, his face pale under his weathered tan. "Miss Catherine, we got trouble. Boss sent me to fetch you quick." Catherine's heart seized. "What happened? Is James hurt?" "No, ma'am, but there's been an accident down at the south pasture. One of the hands got thrown from his horse, hit his head hard. Boss is with him, but he needs you to bring the medical supplies and—" He glanced at Tommy. "And maybe keep the boy here. It ain't pretty." Catherine was already moving, gathering bandages, carbolic acid, clean cloths. "Tommy, you stay here. Don't move from that chair, understand?" "But Thomas," she used her stern teacher voice. "Stay put, I mean it." She climbed onto the horse Hank had waiting, not bothering with the side saddle, and they rode hard for the south pasture. The scene that greeted her made her stomach turn. A young man, couldn't have been more than 20, lay unconscious on the ground. Blood matted his hair and ran down his face. James knelt beside him, his hands already stained red, pressing a wadded shirt to the wound. "Catherine, thank God." James's voice was tight. "It's bad. Real bad. I've sent someone for Doc Patterson, but it'll be hours before he gets here." Catherine slid off the horse and dropped to her knees beside them. "Let me see." The wound was deep, a gash along the young man's temple, but it was the way his pupils were different sizes that scared her most. She'd seen it before, when her mother's friend had fallen down the stairs. "Concussion," she said quietly. "Bad one. We need to stop the bleeding and keep him still. If he wakes up, he might be confused, violent even." For the next hour, Catherine worked alongside James, cleaning the wound, bandaging it as best she could, monitoring the young man's breathing. The other hands hovered nearby, anxious and helpless. When Doc Patterson finally arrived, he examined their work and nodded approvingly. "You two did good. Might have saved his life, keeping pressure on that wound." They transported the injured man back to the ranch house, setting him up in the spare room. Doc Patterson stayed the night, monitoring him, while Catherine sat vigil, changing his bandages, checking his pulse. James brought her coffee around midnight, settling into the chair beside her. "You should sleep," Catherine said. "So should you. Someone needs to watch him. Then we'll watch him together." James took her hand. "You were amazing today. Calm, efficient. Where'd you learn all that?" "My mother was ill for a long time before she died. I learned to tend wounds, mix medicines, recognize warning signs." Catherine smiled sadly. "It was hard, watching her suffer, but at least I was able to make her comfortable. You've seen a lot of pain for someone so young." "So have you." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching over the injured man. Around 3 in the morning, his eyes fluttered open. He was confused, disoriented, but alive. Doc Patterson declared him out of immediate danger by morning. James sent a telegram to the man's family, arranged for care, and paid his wages in full, even though he'd be laid up for weeks. "You're a good man," Catherine told him when they finally had a moment alone. "He works for me. He got hurt on my land. It's my responsibility." "Not every employer would see it that way." James shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's the right thing to do." That night, after Doc Patterson had left and the injured hand was sleeping peacefully, Catherine found herself too keyed up to rest. The adrenaline of the day was wearing off, leaving her shaky and emotional. She was standing on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air when James found her. "Thought you'd be asleep by now," he said softly. "Couldn't settle." Catherine turned to look at him. "Every time I close my eyes, I see all that blood. And I keep thinking, what if it had been you? What if you'd been the one thrown from that horse?" James crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "I'm fine. I'm here. But you could have been hurt. or worse. And Catherine's voice broke. I just found you. I can't lose you. Hey, James tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes. You're not going to lose me. I'm careful out there, and I've got too much to live for now to take stupid risks. Promise me, Catherine whispered. Promise you'll be careful. I promise. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. I've got a wedding to plan, remember? Can't do that if I'm laid up with a broken head. Despite everything, Catherine laughed. About that? When were you thinking? How about next week? Doc Patterson said Tommy's splint can come off in a few days. Once he's mobile again, we could go into town, have the preacher. Next week? Catherine's eyes widened. James, that's so soon. I don't have a dress. I'd need to. You could wear a flour sack and you'd still be the most beautiful bride I've ever seen, James said firmly. But if you want more time, we can wait. I don't want to wait, Catherine. Don't want to spend another night without you. But it's your choice. Catherine thought about it. Thought about all the reasons she should wait, should be sensible, should take time to plan properly. Then she thought about how short life was, how quickly things could change, how precious every moment was. Next week, she said. Let's do it next week. James's answering smile could have lit up the whole Montana sky. James stood there, and Catherine's heart did its now familiar flip at the sight of him. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hair falling across his forehead, and there was a wild look in his eyes that made her stand up quickly. What's wrong? Storm coming, he said tersely. Big one. I need to get the stock to shelter, but Tommy, I'll watch him, Catherine said immediately. Go. James hesitated, his eyes searching her face. It's going to be bad. The wind alone. Make sure all the windows are latched, and if it gets real rough, take him to the cellar. You know where it is? Yes. Good. He started to leave, then turned back. Catherine, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Thank you for everything these past weeks. Having you here. Just thank you. Then he was gone, running toward the barn with long strides. Catherine stood frozen, her name echoing in her mind. It was the first time he'd used it. Catherine, not Miss Miller. And the way he'd said it, rough and warm like whiskey, had sent shivers down her spine. Told you, Tommy said smugly. Papa likes you. The storm hit an hour later with a fury that terrified Catherine. Wind howled around the house, rattling windows and sending debris flying past. Rain lashed the glass in horizontal sheets, and thunder cracked so loud it shook the walls. Tommy, brave little soul that he was, only whimpered once before pressing himself against Catherine's side. Papa's out there, he whispered. Your papa knows these storms, Catherine said with more confidence than she felt. He'll be fine. But as the hours dragged on, and darkness fell early under the black clouds, her worry grew. The ranch hands would have taken shelter in the bunkhouse, but where was James? She lit lamps against the gloom, made Tommy eat some bread and cheese, even though neither of them was hungry, and tried not to jump at every crash of thunder. It was nearly 8 o'clock when she heard the door slam open. She rushed from the kitchen to find James standing in the doorway, soaked to the skin and breathing hard. Blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow, mixing with the rainwater dripping from his hair. Oh my God, Catherine breathed. Tommy, get towels and the medical kit from the kitchen. James tried to wave her off. It's nothing, just a scratch from a branch. Sit down, Catherine ordered, surprising herself with her firm tone. Now, to her amazement, he obeyed, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs. Tommy arrived with towels and the medical supplies, his eyes wide with concern. I'm all right, son, James said gently. Go on up to bed. I'll come check on you in a bit. But Papa, mind me now, Tommy. The boy looked between them, then nodded and scampered upstairs. Catherine knelt beside James's chair, carefully wiping the blood from his face. The cut wasn't deep, but it was still bleeding sluggishly. She pressed a clean cloth to it, aware of how close she was to him, how her skirts brushed his legs, how his breath stirred her hair. This might sting, she warned, dabbing at the wound with carbolic acid. James didn't even flinch. His eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her hands tremble. You should get out of these wet clothes, Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. You'll catch your death. Catherine, his voice was low, rough. Look at me. She did, and the expression in his storm-grey eyes made her breath catch. Want and restraint warred there, along with something deeper, something that made her heart race. I can't stop thinking about you, he said quietly. Haven't been able to since that first day. I know it ain't proper. Know you came here for employment, not this, but I'm only human. And having you in my house, seeing you with my son, hearing you laugh, he closed his eyes. Tell me to stop. Tell me you want to leave, and I'll arrange it. I'll give you enough money to start over somewhere else, and I won't say another word. Catherine's hand was still pressed to his forehead, the cloth forgotten. Her heart thundered in her chest. Every sensible part of her said she should step back, should maintain the boundaries they'd so carefully constructed. Instead, she whispered, "What if I don't want you to stop?" James's eyes flew open. "You don't know what you're saying. I'm 23 years old, not a child. I know my own mind." Catherine's voice shook slightly, but she didn't look away. "I came west, looking for a home. A family, a place to belong. I thought it would be with Harold Pritchard, but maybe I was waiting for the wrong man. Catherine," her name was a plea, a prayer. "I see how you look at me," she continued, emboldened by his reaction. "And I know how I look at you. I know I shouldn't feel this way after such a short time, but I do. You make me feel safe and wanted," and she didn't get to finish. James surged up from the chair, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that belied his size, and kissed her. It wasn't sweet or tentative. It was hungry, desperate, the kiss of a man who'd been restraining himself far too long. His lips moved over hers with an intensity that stole her breath, and when she gasped, he deepened the kiss, tasting her thoroughly. Catherine had been kissed before, chaste pecks from suitors her mother had approved. This was nothing like those tepid exchanges. This was fire and need, and something primal that made her knees weak. When James finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his eyes dark with desire. "I've been alone 5 years, he said, his voice barely above a rasp. 5 years since I touched a woman, wanted a woman. But God help me, Catherine. I want you in my house, in my life, in my bed." He swallowed hard. "But I won't rush you. Won't push you into something you're not ready for." Catherine's whole body was trembling. She could feel the heat of him, even through his wet clothes, could see the restraint it cost him to hold back. "What are you proposing?" she asked softly. "Marry me." The words were simple, direct, not as an arrangement, not as employment. "Marry me because I'm half crazy for you? Because my son adores you? Because you fit here like you were always meant to be here?" He rested his forehead against hers. "I know it's fast. I know you barely know me, but I'm asking anyway." Catherine closed her eyes, her mind spinning. A week ago, she'd been abandoned at a train station. Now, a good, honorable man was offering her everything she'd ever wanted. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." James made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan, pulling her into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, surrounded by his warmth, despite his soaked clothing. "You won't regret this," he murmured into her hair. "I swear to you, Catherine, I'll spend every day making sure you never regret this." "I know," she said, and meant it. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Silver Creek. Tommy served as an enthusiastic witness, and Cookie made a wedding cake that was lopsided but delicious. Catherine wore her blue traveling dress, the same one she'd worn while waiting at the train station. But this time, when she stood at the small church altar with James's large hand engulfing hers, she felt nothing but joy. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher announced. "You may kiss your bride." James looked down at her, a question in his eyes. Catherine smiled and nodded. The kiss was brief, proper, suitable for an audience, but the promise in it made Catherine's toes curl in her boots. That evening, after Tommy had finally been coaxed to bed and the house had fallen quiet, Catherine stood in what was now their bedroom. The yellow-curtained nursery had been deemed too small, and she'd moved her things into the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Sarah's things were long gone, James had explained. He'd packed them away years ago, unable to bear the daily reminders of his loss. Catherine had been relieved. She didn't want to sleep in a dead woman's shadow. Now she sat at the dressing table in her nightgown, brushing her long brown hair with trembling hands. She heard James's footsteps in the hall, heard him check on Tommy, heard him pause outside their door. He knocked, softly. "Can I come in?" "It's your room," Catherine said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. James entered, closing the door behind him. He'd washed and changed into clean trousers and a soft shirt, his damp hair curling at his collar. He looked younger somehow, less weathered, though there was still an intensity in his gaze that made Catherine's breath catch. "You're nervous," he observed, crossing to her slowly. A little, she admitted. James knelt beside her chair, taking the brush gently from her hands. May I? Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. He began to brush her hair with long, careful strokes. His touch was reverent, gentle, and the intimacy of the act made tears prick Catherine's eyes. You have beautiful hair, James murmured. Been wanting to touch it since the first day. Wanted to see it down, loose like this. It's just brown, Catherine said. It's like chestnuts in sunshine, like rich earth, like everything good and warm. He set the brush down, running his fingers through her hair. You see yourself so plainly, Catherine, but I see something different. I see a woman who's brave and kind and strong. A woman who made a leap of faith, who trusted a stranger, who's already made my house a home again. Catherine turned to face him, cupping his jaw. I see you too, James. See how hard you work, how much you love your son, how alone you've been. She stroked her thumb over his cheekbone. I don't want you to be alone anymore. Then I won't be. He stood, drawing her up with him. I need you to know something. This isn't just about tonight, about what we're about to do. This is forever, Catherine. You're mine now, and I'm yours, and nothing's going to change that. I know, she whispered. I feel it too. James kissed her then, slow and deep, his large hands spanning her waist. Catherine melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair as the kiss grew more heated. When he lifted her in his arms, she gasped against his mouth. Too much? He asked, his voice rough. No, she breathed. Perfect. You're perfect. He carried her to the bed, laying her down with a gentleness that made her heart ache. The lamp cast golden light over them as James stretched out beside her, propping himself on one elbow to look down at her. I'll be gentle, he promised. I know this is new for you. Catherine reached up to trace the line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. I'm not afraid. Not with you. What followed was a revelation. James was true to his word, taking his time, worshipping her with touches and kisses that made her forget every moment of loneliness, every rejection, every fear. He murmured endearments against her skin, told her she was beautiful, perfect, his. When he finally joined with her, Catherine gasped at the stretch, the fullness, the rightness of it. James stilled immediately, his arms trembling with restraint. Am I hurting you? No, she whispered, wrapping her legs around his hips. Don't stop. Please don't stop. He moved then, slow and deep, watching her face in the lamplight. Catherine had never imagined anything could feel like this, never knew her body was capable of such sensation. When the pleasure crested, she cried out, and James swallowed the sound with his kiss, following her over the edge with a groan. Afterward, he held her close, her head on his chest, their legs tangled together. I love you, James said quietly. No, it's fast. No, you might not feel the same yet, but I need you to know. I love you, Catherine Hawthorne. Catherine tilted her head up to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. This strong, capable man was laying his heart bare for her. I love you too, she said, and watched wonder bloom across his face. I think I started falling that first day, when you offered me dignity instead of charity, when you showed me what a good man looks like. James kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. You've given me my life back. Didn't even realize how much I'd just been going through the motions until you arrived. Now everything's brighter, warmer. You did that. They made love again. Slower this time, savoring each touch, each kiss, each whispered word. And when Catherine finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she dreamed not of what she'd lost, but of what she'd found. The next few months passed in a haze of happiness Catherine had never imagined possible. She threw herself into making the ranch a true home, sewing new curtains, planting a garden, teaching Tommy not just his letters but history and arithmetic and manners. But it wasn't all blissful harmony. There were challenges too. Adjustments to make. Catherine had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, had to prove herself to the hands who were skeptical of the new Mrs. Hawthorne. Cookie, in particular, had been territorial about the kitchen at first, until Catherine had asked him to teach her his biscuit recipe. After that, they'd become allies, working together to keep the men fed during roundup season. There were hard days, too. Days when the accounts didn't balance and they had to cut back on luxuries. Days when the weather turned harsh and Catherine worried herself sick until James came home safe. Days when Tommy tested boundaries, acting out because he missed the freedom of having his father's undivided attention. One particularly difficult evening, about 2 months after the wedding, Tommy threw a tantrum at bedtime, screaming that Catherine wasn't his real mother and couldn't tell him what to do. Catherine had fled to the bedroom, tears streaming down her face, while James dealt with their son. When he finally came to find her, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, feeling like a failure. "He hates me," she said miserably. "He doesn't hate you. He's tired and testing limits and being 5 years old." James sat beside her, pulling her against his side. "He loves you, Catherine. He's just figuring out what it means to have a mother again. Maybe I'm doing it all wrong. Maybe I'm too strict, or not strict enough, or you're doing fine. Better than fine. You're exactly what he needs. What we both need." James kissed the top of her head. "And tomorrow he'll apologize because I'm going to make sure of it. But tonight, you need to know that you're a good mother, the best mother he could ask for." The next morning, Tommy had indeed apologized, throwing himself into Catherine's arms with tears and promises to be good. And Catherine had held him tight, understanding that this was part of it, part of building a family, part of love. There were also moments of pure magic, like the day Tommy's splint came off, and he actually ran, for the first time in weeks, laughing with pure joy. Or the evening James came home with wildflowers he'd picked just because he thought they'd make Catherine smile. Or the quiet Sunday mornings, when the three of them would pile into the big bed and tell stories until the sun was high in the sky. James courted her even though they were already married, bringing her small gifts, a ribbon from town, a smooth stone from the creek, a book he thought she'd enjoy. He'd take her for rides to show her the beauty of the land, pointing out where the elk grazed in winter, where the eagles nested, where he'd built his first cabin with his own hands, and the physical intimacy between them only deepened. James was an attentive lover, patient and thorough, taking his time to learn what made Catherine gasp, what made her arch into his touch, what made her cry out his name. There were nights of slow, sweet love-making, and others of desperate passion. There were stolen moments during the day, quick kisses in the barn, lingering touches in the kitchen when Tommy wasn't looking. Catherine discovered a sensual side of herself she'd never known existed. She grew bold, initiating their encounters, wearing her nightgown in ways that made James's eyes darken with want, whispering things that made him groan and pull her closer. But it wasn't just passion, it was the quiet moments too. James reading to Tommy while Catherine mended shirts, her needle moving in and out while she listened to his deep voice bring the stories to life. Catherine bringing James coffee while he worked on the ledgers, her hand resting on his shoulder while he explained the numbers, seeking her input on ranch decisions. The three of them sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and pink, Tommy chattering about his day while the adults exchanged knowing glances over his head. It was family, real family, the kind Catherine had dreamed of but never thought she'd have. One crisp autumn morning, about 4 months after the wedding, Catherine woke feeling queasy. She barely made it to the chamber pot before her stomach rebelled, emptying what little remained from last night's supper. James was beside her instantly, holding her hair back, his face creased with concern. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" Catherine sat back on her heels, wiping her mouth with a shaky hand. Then it hit her. She counted back the weeks since her last monthly courses, counted again to be sure. "I'm not sick," she said slowly, a smile spreading across her face despite the nausea. "At least, not the way you mean." It took James a moment. Then his eyes went wide. "You mean?" "I think so. I'm almost certain." He pulled her into his arms, careful despite his obvious joy. "Are you sure? Should we get Doc Patterson?" "Not yet. It's early." "But James..." She pulled back to look at him, saw the wonder and happiness written all over his face. "By next summer, Tommy's going to be a big brother." James let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, burying his face in her neck. "A baby? We're having a baby." "Yes," Catherine said, her own tears falling now. "We are. They told Tommy that evening at supper." The boy's reaction was everything they could have hoped for. "Really? Really, truly?" He bounced in his chair, his dinner forgotten. "Can it be a brother? I want a brother to play with." "We don't get to choose," James said, ruffling his son's hair. "But either way, you're going to be the best big brother in Montana. I'm going to teach him everything, how to ride and rope and—" Tommy paused. "What if it's a girl? Then you teach her everything," Catherine said firmly. "Girls can ride and rope too." Tommy considered this. "Can we name her after Mama? If it's a girl?" Catherine's breath caught. She looked at James, uncertain. But James smiled, his eyes soft. "I think that would be real nice, son, if Miss Catherine agrees." "I'd be honored," Catherine said, and meant it. Sarah Hawthorne had given her this family in a way, had given her James and Tommy. It felt right to honor her memory. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Catherine was sick for weeks, could barely keep food down, and James fretted over her constantly. He wanted to wrap her in cotton wool, wouldn't let her do any heavy work, drove Doc Patterson crazy with his worried questions. "She's having a baby, not dying of consumption," the doctor finally said in exasperation. "Let the woman live her life, Hawthorne." But Catherine didn't mind James's protectiveness, understood it came from love and the memory of losing Sarah. She let him fuss, let him worry, and when he'd wake in the middle of the night to check that she was still breathing, she'd pull him close and remind him that she was fine. They were all fine. As her belly grew, Catherine felt more beautiful than she ever had in her life. James couldn't keep his hands off her, constantly marveling at the changes in her body, talking to their baby through her skin. "Gonna be beautiful like your mama," he'd murmur, his hands splayed across her swollen stomach. "They're gonna be smart and kind and perfect. Might be stubborn like their father," Catherine would tease. "God help us all if they get your stubbornness and my temper." But when the baby kicked, strong and healthy, they'd both go quiet with wonder, James's eyes shining with unshed tears. Winter came, bringing snow that transformed the ranch into a white wonderland. Tommy was ecstatic, building snow forts and sledding down hills, while Catherine watched from the warm kitchen, her hand on her belly. It was a good winter, despite the cold. The ranch was profitable, the stock healthy, and their stores were full. James had hired an additional hand to help with the heavier work, giving Catherine peace of mind that he wasn't overextending himself. But in late February, disaster struck. Catherine woke one night to the smell of smoke. She shook James awake, already stumbling toward the door. "Fire!" she gasped. "James, there's a fire!" They ran outside to find the barn engulfed in flames, the horses screaming in terror. James didn't hesitate, running toward the burning building while Catherine grabbed Tommy, who'd woken at the commotion. "Stay here!" James shouted. "Don't you dare come near this barn!" Catherine held Tommy tight, watching in horror as James disappeared into the smoke. The ranch hands appeared from the bunkhouse, forming a bucket brigade, but it was clear the barn was lost. The best they could hope for was to save the animals and keep the fire from spreading. Time seemed to crawl. Catherine stood frozen, pregnant and terrified, as men ran in and out of the burning structure. The horses were led out one by one, wild-eyed and panicked. The cattle in the nearby pen were moved to safety, but James didn't come out. "Where is he?" Catherine demanded of Hank. "Where's James?" "Last horse is still in there, Mom. The boss, he wouldn't leave without—" Catherine didn't wait to hear the rest. She thrust Tommy at Cookie and ran toward the barn. "Mrs. Hawthorne, no!" someone shouted. But Catherine was already at the entrance, the heat hitting her like a physical blow. Through the smoke, she could see James struggling with the last horse, a stallion that was rearing and fighting him. "James!" she screamed. He looked up, his face blackened with soot, his eyes widening in horror when he saw her. "Catherine, get out! Not without you!" Something in her voice must have gotten through. James gave one last mighty heave, and the stallion bolted past him, past Catherine, out into the night. James followed, grabbing Catherine's arm and hauling her away from the barn, just as part of the roof collapsed with a deafening crash. They stumbled together, falling to the snow-covered ground a safe distance away. James rolled to cover her body with his, protecting her and their unborn child, even as debris rained down around them. When the danger had passed, James pulled back, his hands frantically running over her. "Are you insane? You could have been killed. The baby, you could have been killed!" Catherine shot back, tears streaming down her face. "You were in there too long, and I thought—" She couldn't finish. James pulled her against his chest, both of them shaking. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry. I just couldn't leave the horse, couldn't let it burn, but I should have thought about you, about the baby." "We're okay," Catherine said, her hands fisting in his singed shirt. We're all okay. They stayed like that, clinging to each other while the barn burned behind them, until Cookie came over with Tommy. The boy threw himself at his parents, sobbing. I was so scared. I thought you were gonna die. We're fine, son, James said, opening his arms to include Tommy in their embrace. We're all fine. The barn burned through the night, leaving nothing but a smoking ruin by morning. The loss was significant. Tools, tack, stored hay, but all the animals had been saved, and no one had been seriously hurt, though James had some burns on his hands that Doc Patterson tended to the next day. You're a damn fool, Hawthorne, the doctor said without heat. Running into a burning barn with your wife 6 months pregnant. What were you thinking? Wasn't thinking, James admitted, wincing as the doctor wrapped his hands. Just reacting. Well, next time, react with your brain instead of your hero complex. Doc Patterson looked at Catherine. And you, young lady, need to stay in bed for the next few days. Make sure all this excitement didn't cause any problems. Catherine wanted to argue, but the truth was, she felt exhausted, shaken. She let James carry her up to bed, let him tuck her in like she was made of glass. I'm going to build a new barn, James said, sitting beside her. Better, safer, stone foundation, proper lightning rods. Never again, Catherine. I never want to scare you like that again. And I never want to watch you run into a burning building again, Catherine said. We have a child to think about now, soon to be 2. We can't take those kinds of risks. James nodded, his bandaged hands gentle as he stroked her hair. You're right. From now on, we think before we act. We stay safe for each other, for Tommy, for this little one. He placed his hand on her belly. I promise. The baby kicked against his palm, as if in agreement, and despite everything, they both smiled. One evening in late summer, Catherine stood at the stove making stew, while Tommy practiced his writing at the table. James came in from the barn, dusty and tired, and immediately crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and nuzzling her neck. Papa, that's mushy, Tommy protested. Your mama's earned some mushy, James said, not releasing Catherine. Speaking of which, I got something for her. He pulled a small box from his pocket and set it on the counter in front of Catherine. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small diamond. Oh, James, she breathed. Ordered it from Denver. No, we got married quick. Didn't have time for proper courting gifts. But I wanted you to have something that shows the world you're mine. He took the ring and slipped it onto her finger, above the plain gold band he'd given her at the wedding. You're my wife, Catherine, my partner, the love of my life. Wanted you to have something beautiful, like you. Catherine turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. I don't need jewelry. I have everything I need right here. I know, but I wanted you to have it anyway. He kissed her softly. You've given me so much. Let me give you this. Can I give Mama something too? Tommy piped up. Catherine laughed through her tears. What would you like to give me, sweetheart? Tommy ran to his room and came back with a carefully folded piece of paper. Catherine opened it to find a drawing of 3 stick figures labeled Papa, Mama, and me. They were holding hands in front of a house with mountains in the background. It's our family, Tommy explained. See? Now you're really my mama. It's official. Catherine knelt down and pulled the boy into a fierce hug. I've been your mama since the day you asked me to be. This just makes it extra official. Over Tommy's head, her eyes met James's. The love she saw there still took her breath away. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Catherine stood on the porch, looking out at the star-strewn sky. James joined her, wrapping a blanket around both of them. Penny for your thoughts, he murmured. I was thinking about the train station, Catherine said softly. 3 days I waited there, feeling like the world had ended. And now, she turned to look at him, now I'm glad Harold Pritchard never came. Because if he had, I wouldn't be here. Wouldn't have you, wouldn't have Tommy, wouldn't have this life. James pulled her closer. You know, I almost didn't go to town that day. Had too much work to do. But something told me I needed to get those supplies myself. Needed to take Tommy with me. Now I know why. He kissed the top of her head. Providence brought you to us, Catherine, and I thank God for it every single day. Me too, Catherine whispered. They stood there in comfortable silence, Catherine's head on James's chest, his arms around her, the Montana night wrapping around them like a blessing. Inside, their son slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring its own work and joys, but tonight, Under the vast western sky, two people who'd been lost had found each other. Two lonely souls had become a family. And if anyone had told Catherine that being abandoned at a train station would lead to this kind of happiness, she would have called them a liar. But standing there in her husband's arms, in front of the home they'd built together, Catherine knew the truth. Sometimes the plans that fall apart make room for something better. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you truly belong. And sometimes a little boy's simple question can change everything. Do you want to be my mom? Yes, Catherine thought, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. Yes, I do. And she had never meant anything more in her entire life. 6 months later, as winter settled over the ranch in a blanket of white, Catherine stood at the same stove where she'd cooked that first awkward meal. But everything was different now. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with baking bread. Tommy sat at the table working through his reader, his letters neat and careful. And James. James was watching her with that look he got sometimes, the one that said he couldn't quite believe his luck. What? Catherine asked, smiling. Nothing, just... You're glowing today. Catherine's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. James, I need to tell you something. He was on his feet immediately, crossing to her. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. She took his hand and placed it over her belly. By summer, Tommy's going to be a big brother. James stared at her, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Then he let out a whoop of joy that made Tommy jump and rush over. What's happening? James scooped him up with one arm while keeping the other around Catherine. You're getting a baby brother or sister, son. Tommy's eyes went wide. Really, 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 Catherine confirmed, laughing as both her boys peppered her face with kisses. That night, as they lay in bed, James's hand splayed possessively over her stomach, Catherine reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here, from abandoned bride to beloved wife and mother. From despair to joy, from homeless to home. I love you, James murmured sleepily. You and Tommy and this little one, my family, my everything. I love you too, Catherine whispered back. All of you, always. Outside, snow fell softly over the Montana mountains. Inside, a family that had been broken and lost and lonely was now whole. And it had all started with a little boy's question and a woman brave enough to say yes. The end.